Hey everyone, this is James Wilson with MTB Strength Training Systems, and welcome back to another Bike James podcast. Today, I've got a very special guest, Steve Maxwell with Maxwell Strength and Conditioning. Steve, thanks for joining us today.
Hey, my pleasure. Thank you for having me on your show.
Awesome. Yeah. So I was telling you before the podcast, Steve, that you have been a big influence on my training career, the philosophies and the programs that I end up writing for people. So people that are listening to this, you may not realize it, but Steve has actually had a big influence on the information that I brought and any of the training programs that I put out there. So I was excited to get Steve on to kind of give his direct insights into some of these things. And he also has a really cool philosophy, which is training for life. And I've kind of stolen that a little bit and started talking about riding for life in the mountain bike community, because there's, a lot of people who are interested in how do I do this for a lifetime, as opposed to, when we're in our 20s and 30s, it's like, how do I perform at my highest level? But then we start to realize that, hey, how do I do this for a long time? So to kick things off, Steve, would you give us a little bit of your background, kind of the origin story for Steve Maxwell? Because I think your background and history is pretty fascinating and really sets you up for a unique expertise and view in the fitness field.
Sometimes I think I've lived 3 lifetimes. And it spans back to Carlisle, Pennsylvania in the 1960s when I first started training. I was a relatively small child and weak, and my father noticed I was getting bullied by a lot of the bigger kids in the neighborhood. It was only older boys mostly in our neighborhood, and it was just me. My brother and I were the only little guys. So he taught my brother and I how to box. He was a U.S. Navy boxer in World War II. And he bought me a barbell set from York Barbell. And York Barbell Club was just down the road. And at that time, the York Barbell Club was the mecca of physical culture and Olympic lifting and strength training in basically the world, especially the U.S. I mean, that's back when we still had Olympic weightlifting champions. And in those days, they didn't differentiate weightlifting from weight training or bodybuilding. Everyone did everything. That's how I cut my teeth. And all through high school, I was lifting and very strongly influenced by the philosophies of York Barbell. And of course, they had some fantastic magazines back then. The old Strength and Health magazine and the old Muscular Development magazine. And later I found Iron Man, the old Perry Raider Iron Man, back when it was still innocent, before it was like loaded with steroid guys. And that's where I cut my teeth on. And I entered Westchester State Teachers College as a physical education major, because the people that I admired most were my wrestling coaches and my football coaches. And I wrestled 4 years, NCAA Division I school, successfully. And my sophomore year, I discovered the works of Arthur Jones. I'd actually been reading about him since 1970. And I became intrigued with this whole concept of high intensity training and Jones Nautilus machines. And lo and behold, the first Nautilus gym in Pennsylvania opened up not too far from where I was going to college. And I started going down there. And I became convinced that this was a really superior method of conditioning for sport. And I actually started working there on weekends. Got my first job in the fitness industry, and this was around 1972. Up to that point, I've been doing the typical programs of the era, the 20 rep squat with a gallon of milk a day for bulking up. And then, following that with the old 5x5, that the Reg Park system, the Mr. Universe from South Africa invented that. And, various other programs. There used to be a guy I loved, Bradley Steiner, who created a or continued a martial art called Defender. And, Dr. Ken Leisner, very famous chiropractor from Valley Stream, New York. These are people that really had a big influence on me. And but once I got started with Nautilus, I was convinced that this is a really superior way to go. And I continued working at different health clubs. I quickly, in my career, decided I didn't really like working in the school system. And kids are pretty tough. I mean, I like coaching. I like teaching PE, but teaching health in the classroom wasn't all that much fun. Kids, even back in the 70s, it was getting pretty rough for teachers. I don't even know how they cope up nowadays, man. I really don't. I mean, my hat's off to anyone that can, because obviously we need good teachers, but I decided I was going to work with adults. So, and anyway, to make a long story short, I worked at a lot of clubs all over Pennsylvania and eventually opened up my own place, Maxwell, in 1990. And it consisted primarily of hammer strength and vintage Nautilus, then had been retrofitted with special cams to make the strength curve a little bit better. And I became very interested in super slow. Ken Hudson. I found Ken was brilliant. And I had a lot of elderly people, a lot of injured people. And I wanted to, have a way, a methodology of being able to work with anyone, whether it be old, young, injured, non-injured, athletic, or just people that wanted to be healthy. And I found that this was a very good system to use. And I actually had my whole staff certified by Ken Hudson himself. My ex-wife was a master trainer in the Super Slow Exercise Guild. And I thought it was really terrific. But then at the same time, I started the first Gracie Jiu-Jitsu school in the Eastern Seaboard. There was only Torrance, California, and Steve Maxwell, pretty much. And it was kind of weird because I would have all these elderly people downstairs. The average age was like in the mid to late 40s. And then I had all these young bucks coming in for jiu-jitsu. I expanded into the upstairs area. You have to understand, Maxwell was like this old building from the 1800s, an old textile manufacturing building, and it was pretty rough. It was like a warehouse. It looked like something out of a Rocky Balboa movie, Sylvester Stallone. I mean, it was pretty rough. But my client list read like a who's who of Philly. So it was strange. Young guys going upstairs for BJJ. And then we had this kind of rehabilitation thing going on downstairs. But I went through a bit of a, I don't know, called a midlife crisis where I started experimenting with other ways of training, trying to maximize my performance in jiu-jitsu. And I started looking at, traditional conditioning styles, like the Hindu wrestlers were renowned for their strength and endurance. Lots of Hindu squats and push-ups, and started swinging clubs, the joris and the maces. And of course, I fell in love with the kettlebell there for a while. I was greatly influenced by Pavel Tsatsouline and some of his ideas about kettlebell training. And what I did was I lost sight of the long game with all that. It was a mistake, a big mistake. Those types of training, I'm not saying they don't work, lifting sandbags and odd objects and, the so-called functional. Yeah, you'll get some results, but the wear and tear on the joints over time is significant. And you actually can create premature body. That's what I discovered after a decade of messing around with this stuff. And I went back to my roots with high intensity training and super slow and isometrics, something that I had been experimenting with for many years and decided to really investigate. And with the time static contraction method, it kind of revolutionized training for many, many people. Now people, even with terrible injuries, really bad back problems and pain, can now safely train in a way that doesn't further increase the pain or injury, and in many cases even helps get rid of it. So that was a long-winded background. It was very detailed, but yeah, I kind of came full circle. I lost sight of the long game there for a while during my competition Jiu-Jitsu days, where I was competing, going to tournaments, and I was looking for an edge, and I thought that the old traditional ways of grappling conditioning would give that to me, but in reality, it really didn't. I think I just caused more harm than good. I definitely screwed up my shoulder with the kettlebells, and I wouldn't recommend training with kettlebells to anyone anymore at all, or swinging clubs or any of this stuff. I really wouldn't. I think people forget about long-term wear and tear. Even if you're not suffering an acute injury, like an immediate injury, you get these very long injuries building up in the body. For example, I like to watch NFL football.
Yep.
Playoffs coming up, right? And
Yep.
you notice, like, sometimes you'll see a guy like just didn't even look like anything happened, and he'll just like pull up or fall down holding his knee or his ankle or whatever. And you wonder, like, wow, what the hell happened there? Like it didn't look like any real contact or anything. What a lot of people don't realize is a lot of these guys do very questionable type of training, box jump, explosive Olympic lifting, and stuff like that. And a lot of those injuries on the field or on the grappling mat or on the basketball court were building up in the gym for weeks or maybe even months, where the joint health was slowly being eroded over time. So that when you see the actual injury, that injury had been building for a long, long time. That was just the straw that broke the camel's back. That last little insult to the body that created the actual acute injury.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. No, man, that was awesome. I really appreciate you sharing all of that. I've heard your story a few times, and every time you tell it a little bit different, I learned something a little bit more. And so yeah, Maxercise, I've actually seen pictures of Maxercise. I originally found out about you through kettlebell training. I got into kettlebell training in the early 2000s. I think like 2004 was when I got my first kettlebell. And I used to work at the International Sports Sciences Association, the ISSA, one of the certification groups. And I remember I was working there in the late 90s, and this fucking book gets sent in for a review. And there's this shirtless dude with this hairy chest, and he's not like that buff, and it's Power to the People. And I'm like, who the hell is this guy? Like, what is this thing? And so, I'd actually, I'd gotten turned on to paddle through that, and then eventually kettlebells. And then through kettlebells is where I originally learned about you, because you were one of the kettlebell guys in the kettlebell community back then, and for, quite a while. And then eventually I got into Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, and then I found out that you did Jiu-Jitsu. And so you kind of, came back into my circle of influence in that way as well. And I went to, it was in Scottsdale, I think like 2018 or 2019, somewhere in there. You did a training for life workshop there, and me and my buddy drove from Colorado to go to it. And I was mainly interested in the mobility part. You're talking about, like, I'm going to show you all the mobility stuff. And at the time I had this really bad groin injury that I tried to work around, and just eventually got to the point where I was like, man, I got to take some time off. Maybe Steve will have some insights. And so I went there for that. And then you started we went through that. Everything was great. You know, I still use everything that you showed there, and have never had a problem with you know, groin injury or anything like that since. Excuse me. But then you got into isometrics, and man, I'll admit, right, like I've been a trainer for quite a while, and I thought I knew, you know, isometrics. Yeah, okay. And man, I was like, what is this guy talking about now? All right, Steve, we'll see what you got. And man, you had us go through the ramping isometrics, you know, some of the super slow stuff, but especially the ramping isometrics. Like I remember there was a point doing the glute bridge that I was like, holy shit, I've never felt my glutes like this before. Like, what's going on here? Like, there's something going on here that we're totally missing. If the glutes are so important, you know, why have I never felt them like I have during this isometric, you know, glute bridge? And so I made a pact, me and my buddy, when we drove back, we made a pact like, dude, we're going to stick with isometrics for 6 months and just see what happens. You know, we're going to, you know, keep each other accountable to not slip back into our, you know, other training methods. And man, after just a few weeks, you could feel the results. And it really made me rethink a lot of my training stuff. And you said something that forever changed my training philosophy, which is the skill of creating tension is one thing, and the skill of applying tension to a movement is another thing. And that, you know, ultimately we've messed up because we're trying to train tension creation skills through movement-based exercise. Whereas really what we want to do is create these tension skills through isometrics and then apply them to our sport, you know, whether it's, you know, jiu-jitsu or whether it's mountain biking or whatever, daily life, right? Whatever that is. But like that was that really changed how I looked at strength training in general and sent my training programs on a completely different path, you know, from there. So yeah, the isometrics and your, you know, you coming all the way around, right? That's why I wanted people to hear your stories, because you've been there, you've done that, and you're still doing it, right? And so you've learned a lot, and you're speaking from experience because you've tried kettlebell training, you've tried, you know, all these different methods, and from experience and also your experience working with clients, you have seen that, okay, really what I need to do is come back to what you guys were doing, you know, early on. I think I remember you mentioned you guys did a lot of isometrics early on in your athletic training career. And then at a certain point, they kind of fell out of favor. I guess, like, you know, your view of the history of the fitness industry is really fascinating to me. Do you have any insights into, you know, like, why did isometrics fall out of favor? Like at one point they were very, like most people don't realize the power rack was invented for isometric training, not to spot you when you're doing squats and bench presses. And so isometrics were a really big part of physical culture, and then they kind of fell out of favor. So like, I guess, what's your insights into like kind of the history of isometrics, and then why do you think they fell out of favor like they did?
Well, the original isometrics that I learned as a kid back in Carlisle, they were all part of the York barbell system.
Mm-hmm.
And when they originally started experimenting with the isometrics with the Olympic lifters in a way to improve their lifts, they were only doing 6-second holds, 6 to 10-second holds in 3 different positions. There had been a study, I don't remember who did it, but they found that you only got strong 15 degrees on either side of whatever position you're holding. For example, if you're holding mid-range, then the strength would increase only 15 degrees on either side of that particular joint angle, or so the claim was. And so they would have you holding multiple positions for short duration. And it did work. I did use it. My coach had a power rack, and during wrestling season, when I was too beat up to do regular lifting, because, oh my God, wrestling is so strenuous, I found isometrics didn't cause the mechanical damage in the muscle, the more metabolic stress than mechanical stress. So it was perfect, you know, to keep your strength levels up. The reason it fell out of disfavor was it was found that the subjects that they were experimenting with at York were also using steroids. This is back when steroids just were coming into vogue. So everyone immediately said, oh, it's not the isometrics, it's the steroids. And that was a big slap to the isometric, movement, because they actually were using anabolic steroid drugs. Didn't mean that the isometrics didn't work, but everyone was claiming that it was the steroids that gave them all those results. So it's kind of a shame, because there was a lot of young guys that weren't using steroids, like myself, that were getting really good results. The other problem with isometrics, they're not very sexy.
No.
You cannot be a YouTube influencer and get people all excited just doing an isometric hold. You can't show off. And a lot of people have a lot of difficulty pushing themselves if they're not going after a certain amount of weight or a certain number of repetitions. They're trapped into that mentality. In reality, the only people that should be worried about the amount of weight or doing a certain number of repetitions are people that are competitive weight lifters, because ultimately it doesn't matter.
Right.
It was found later, however, with the longer isometrics. Let me also say there's two types of isometrics, yielding and overcoming. A yielding isometric that a lot of people are familiar with is the wall sit, where you put your back against the wall, go down to a half squat, and you hold. Okay, that's a yielding isometric. You're holding a certain weight, your body weight, with your thighs and hips. Or the flexed arm hang that they use in a lot of gym classes. They used to use it a lot for the females, where you hold yourself at the top of a pull-up bar for time. And it's an excellent exercise, by the way. And eventually your muscles give out and you have to yield to the weight. You reach a momentary muscular failure. The other type of isometric is called a overcoming isometric, where you push against an immovable object. Like the old York power rack was a combination where you would hold a barbell against the pin for time, so you knew exactly how much you were exerting for how long. But then they made another iso power rack and also a little chain device with basically, my dad got me one. You would stand on like a little footboard with a little chain and like a little wooden dowel rod, and you could set it at different heights for doing curls, rows, presses, deadlifts, stuff like that. And there's no way to measure what you do. You only know how hard you're exerting. So that was a bugaboo. But then later, Ken Hutchins came up with a design for computer feedback statics, where he actually made equipment, machines, with a computer screen where you could literally see on the screen a little graphic line of your output, and it would record it and keep a record of it. And a lot of people found that very motivating. What I found, it doesn't matter. After you've been lifting for 4 or 5 years, man, you're not going to get any bigger or stronger or faster. That's a big myth that the fitness community tries to perpetuate. So you keep buying the latest program, the latest supplement, the magic pill, that's going to do it for you. In reality, you reach your genetic potential fairly quickly. Most of us don't really have that much genetic potential. The genetic potential for having huge muscles, like an Arnold Schwarzenegger, is about the same as growing to 7 foot tall. Go to any shopping mall, huge shopping mall, and sit there and observe the people. Or even on the beach. You may see in a whole day one really muscular guy, maybe. Most people are average, size. Same thing with height. You see a really tall guy, maybe, and maybe occasionally you'll see the other end, like a really short person or even a little midget. That's how muscular size. Most people don't have the genetics, no matter what they do.
Right.
Even if they took steroids, it'd still be mediocre results. So if that be true, you still have to do resistance training so you don't lose your muscle mass as you get older. For sure, if you don't use it, you'll lose it. And, you see a lot of older people that have lost their muscle. They're in walkers or canes or wheelchairs, and with the loss of muscle tissue comes balance issues, because your balance is largely dependent on the strength of your glutes and your hamstrings to keep you upright. And if you lose that muscle, you lose your independence. Soon you can't drive anymore. You can't lift anything. You can't lift your grandchildren. You can't go for a mountain bike ride. You can't go play a round of golf. You need to keep that strength. And I found isometrics is an ideal way to do it. And all you have to really do is give an honest effort. Really push it as hard as you can. And who cares how much it is? Who cares how much force you're actually producing? If you're producing as much as you can in that time frame, then your body's going to do the rest. Whatever genetic potential you have will be met. And, I'm 70, so I'm, basically I'm way past the day of gains. So I'm trying to hold on to what I've built over my lifetime. And to younger guys out there that want to incorporate isometrics, it's a great training system. It'll give you still have plenty of energy to go out and do the other stuff you like. I like doing jiu-jitsu even now. In fact, I rolled last night with a whole bunch of 20-year-olds. I'm feeling it today. I was careful,
Yeah.
And some people might say, well, what the hell are you doing, Steve? You just talked about how dangerous kettlebells are. Now you're doing something ultra dangerous like jiu-jitsu. Well, we got to pick our poisons.
Yeah, that's true.
And to tell the God's honest truth, man, you know this, James. I had way more injuries in my mountain bike career. I used to race mountain bikes. I had way more injuries wrecking in single tracks, trying to pass people and all sorts of crazy shenanigans, and than I ever did in jiu-jitsu. I had bad wrecks, man. I wiped out one pretty bad. So,
Yeah. And I joke around. I tell people I've sacrificed many body parts to the mountain biking gods, and some of them more than once. So it's, I've had way worse injuries from mountain biking than jiu-jitsu, but that's.
But the point is, okay, if you do engage in these strenuous sports, we know going in that they're dangerous. We understand there's a risk in participating in them. We do. And we accept that risk. We accept that risk. In all the years I ran my jiu-jitsu school, I was never sued once for a guy getting hurt, ever. But I had 2 lawsuits, people hurting themselves in the gym, which is interesting. My insurance for my gym was way more than my martial arts insurance.
Yeah.
Which a lot of people are surprised. And it was their own negligence, by the way. I won the case. They were just doing stupid things and not following protocol when they got hurt.
Right.
It wasn't supervised training. It was people working out on their own. And in all the years that I worked with people in the gym, training people, and the many thousands of people, I never hurt anyone, ever. Not once. And well, that's not true. In kettlebells, I had a couple injuries. There were injuries. But my point is that with proper strength training, you should never get hurt. One of the principles of proper strength training is that it helps prevent injuries in other sports. You can't guarantee a person will be injury proof. You can't go riding a single track trail down a steep mountainside with rocks all over the place and not, be subject to some type of problem, injury or whatever. Same thing like you get in the mat. Yes, I can tap, but let's hope my partner lets go, because now there's a second party involved. So it's not just me anymore, but there's another person also. So, but we accept there's a risk. But anyone going into a gym, if you're getting hurt in the gym, then you got to take a hard look at what you're doing, why you're doing it, and you're just not training properly. If you're a weightlifter, okay, I get it. If you're a power lifter, Olympic lifter, or a kettlebell sport competitor or whatever, yeah, okay, yeah. Pushing the limits, you're going to get hurt at some point. But for normal people training for health, longevity, or bodybuilding, or trying to improve their performance in sport, you should never get hurt. Never.
Yeah. Yeah. No, that's something I definitely have tried to help people understand. And also, you know, your strength training shouldn't detract from your ability to perform. So like if you're getting on the bike and you're just perpetually so sore that you can't really perform well, something's off there too. So, you know, even if you're not getting injured, but usually, like I said, those long-term injuries add up, like you were talking about earlier. Like they may not have some sort of acute injury, but that's the other thing is like, man, if you're having to, you know, if you think ibuprofen's a vitamin that you take on a regular basis, there may be something off with your training. And that was something that I really found with Isometrics was that they're easy on you mechanically, right? Like they don't produce the same amount of soreness. They don't produce the same like potential for joint pain. And so you can do them on a regular basis, like pretty much a daily basis, and then be able to train, right? Like I would do my isometric workout before open mat with jiu-jitsu, where like I wouldn't, or you know, sometimes before going for a ride, but I'd never think about doing like a hard traditional strength training workout like I used to do, and then trying to do that because like it would affect me so much physically, and you know, realizing like, hey, that's, you know, detracting from my sport training, you know, was definitely a big insight for me. So yeah, if it's taken away from your sport training, then it's not, you know, you got to question like, why are you doing it? You know, is it really necessary? But you know, people love to, they like to chase those numbers, but you know, that's also, I think, like the fact that there are no external numbers with isometrics is one of their, it's a negative at first, but it turns into a positive because like you said, it really forces you to learn what a good, honest effort is from yourself. Like at first, most people don't even know like how to like contract their muscles at 100% to try to like, you know, press into the wall or the, you know, jiu-jitsu belt or whatever they're using to do that. And so like learning to do that. And then it also, I find that it helps self-regulate, right? Like, cause like your 100% is going to be different from day to day. And so like your 100% today may be more than yesterday. And if isometrics will automatically kind of self-regulate that, like when you're feeling good, you're going to be able to produce more tension and go a little harder. Whereas if you're not going to be able to. But if you're just using numbers in the gym and you go in and it's like, you know, hey, you need to lift this amount of weight for this many reps. Well, like maybe that, you know, that's not a true reflection of where you are that day. So yeah, I think that a lot of the things like I said you talked about are super beneficial for athletes who are looking to train hard but not leave themselves beat up and risk injury in the process. Because I think the last part of why isometrics aren't popular is because they're freaking hard. Like they're soul crushingly hard.
If they're performed properly. I wouldn't recommend anyone do them every day. No way. You know, once or twice a week is enough, especially if you're doing 90-second time under load. Woo. You know, it takes a while to recover from that. And there's no reason why you can't mix it in with other super slow. Like right now, I'm doing a combination of body weight. I like to do very slow chin ups, push ups, and body weight squats. And you would think that body weight squats would be really easy. But man, the way I do them, where you stay out of the top third range, because that's a very easy range of motion. It doesn't really need to be strengthened. When you go from the bottom as the ankles and you come up slightly past parallel to where your knees are about 90 degrees and the top of your thighs 45-degree angle to the floor, and then do a slow turnaround, man, 4 reps, 5 reps feels back like when I was doing like heavy hammer strength leg presses or heavy kettlebell squats. It feels every bit as hard. And you know, it's amazing how it's kept my leg very, very strong. There is a downside to isometrics, however. Because you're not getting a range of motion, you need to stretch and do mobility on a daily basis also. You
Yeah, yeah.
You want to definitely continue your yoga if you do yoga, or some form of stretching, or I like a lot of the Russian Slavic health system type mobility drills. I use a lot, but yeah, you definitely need to stretch the hamstrings in particular, the hip flexors, the quads, the groin. Definitely stretch out the upper body, shoulders, neck, because isometrics, if that's all you do, you could potentially tighten up a bit.
Yeah, well, that was a good segue into the other aspect of your training philosophy that I wanted to touch on, which is mobility. So like I said, I definitely learned a lot from you in that workshop I went to, and have continue to use a lot of those things. And so so when you talk about stretching, for example, like, do you have a certain protocol or time that you like people to hold, or any sort of like, stretching method using, breathing or anything to help? Like, kind of what, what, I guess, what kind of is your preferred, I guess, principles or methods when it comes to that?
I used to do like almost like what they call isometric stretching, where you put yourself in like an extreme range where you're getting that stretch reflex kicking in, and then you isometrically contract and then sigh and relax. And the sigh kind of releases that stretch reflex for a moment, because you go from your into your autonomic reflex, and you let go of that stretch reflex just for a moment. You kind of fool your body into relaxing, and you do a series of like quick breaths while isometrically contracting, and then relax. That's a pretty quick way to increase flexibility. It's used by gymnasts and by martial artists and dancers and ice skaters for years and years, and it worked. Now that I'm older, I just don't care that much anymore. If I can put, I can put my palms in the floor, from a standing position, and how flexible do you have to be?
Right.
I'm no longer chasing a split like I did when I was younger. I mean, so a lot of times I'll just do what we call relaxing the stretch. Well, I'll just get in a stretch position and hold it for a prolonged period of time. While listening to music, maybe watching a TV show. Sometimes I even do it when I'm doing a Zoom session. I'll put my foot up on the table while I'm talking to someone, or, taking someone through a workout, and I'll stand on my right leg and put my left foot on the table, turn various ways while watching the person hold their isometric or whatever. And, you can do like great little routine just standing at your desk. You can do a standing pigeon. You can do hamstring, groin. You can put your foot on the desk and stretch your quads, your foot on the chair and get into a deep lunge. You get your hip flexor. You can just work all around your hips and your body. And it seems like back and hips are the things that really get tight in most older people. That's where I notice my own tightness. Those hips are so very stubborn. Seems like we put a lot of negative emotions in the neck and hip. Your emotional state has an awful lot to do with your body shape and the amount of tension you hold, which brings us to another, breathing.
Yes.
If a person's breathing is impaired, if they're upper chest breathing all the time and dysfunctional, they're in a constant state of fight or flight. The upper chest, the upper lobes of the lungs, are your sympathetic nervous system, and that's constantly telling you that there's a stressful situation going on. You're pumping out cortisol, and sometimes you can get adrenalized, and it creates a tension throughout the whole body. Whereas if you're breathing in the lower lobes of the lungs, your parasympathetic nervous system, or rest and digest, you stay in a calmer, more relaxed manner throughout the day. That goal should be nasal breathing into the lower lobes of the lungs most of the time. There is a place for mouth breathing, in dire emergencies, but for the most part, 95% of the time, you're going to be breathing through the nose and exhaling through the nose, or breathing through the nose and exhaling through the mouth is fine. You can vent through the mouth. And you try to maintain that as much as you can for all activities, even mountain biking, even, doing strenuous sport. You try to nasal inhale. Only during the hardest of exertions might you go to the mouth. But no one ever said it was healthy.
Right. Yeah.
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 And this may sound strange or unusual, but I took to taping my mouth shut at night.
Yeah, I've talked about that before, and so yeah, if you like to touch on that, talk about the mouth taping.
Well, I studied a system of breathing and breath control called the Buteco, and people can look it up if they want. And basically, a lot of people will breathe very dysfunctionally at night, or their nose will get a little stuffy. And usually a stuffy nose is due to intestinal congestion, poor diet. You get a stuffy nose and it'll clog up on you, and people start to breathe through the mouth. Very bad for oral hygiene, terrible for your health. Usually that's concomitant with snoring or even sleep apnea. But by putting a simple piece of tape over the mouth, you will be forced to breathe through the nose. And the benefit of nose breathing is you get nitric oxide produced in the linings of the nasal passages, which opens up all of the capillaries and allows more blood to enter the blood. And if you breathe through your mouth, you're not getting the NO, the nitric oxide. So you're really depriving yourself of good oxygenation from your breathing. If people want to read, it's way more complicated than that, but if people want to read about it, I would recommend The Oxygen Advantage by Ewan McEwen. But there's been a bunch of books written about Buteco. There's a lot. Breathing is kind of a popular thing right now, it differs from the Wim Hof style, by the way. Wim Hof is more a way of breathing to get you really, your nervous system really excited and get really exercised so that you can withstand extreme cold. And I've seen benefits from it. I don't know, the jury's still out. I'm not sure that any extremist type behavior is really ultimately that good for anyone. I just don't know. Sitting in ice cold water for prolonged periods of time, I don't know whether that prolongs life or detracts. I just don't know. I've seen some pretty rough looking people. But, look old before their time. So I don't know. I'm not going to cast judgment on it. I know I don't particularly care for it, but the Buteco it works great for me. Really, really, really good. Nasal breathing. And I try to do it even when I'm on the Jiu-Jitsu mat. I try to maintain breath control at all times when I'm strength training with Isometrics. And one thing about the isometric, because it is a very long contraction, 30 seconds at 50%, the second 30 seconds at 75%, and the final 30 seconds as hard as you dare, that's 90 seconds of contracting the targeted muscle group. You have to really learn how to breathe, because holding your breath during isometrics could be very dangerous, really spike that blood pressure. So you learn to breathe through it. And that translates very well to martial arts, and particularly grappling. It really, truly does. Because if you think about grappling, it's one isometric to another, just a series of isometrics. There'll be a flow or a little flurry, and then isometric, and a flow for it, then a hold, and then a hold. So it's a series of static holds, and learning how to breathe so that you don't get overly exhausted doing that is really, really good. It's ironic because isometrics we do for training, we're trying to exhaust themselves as quickly as possible. And in Jiu-Jitsu, the isometrics, we're trying to use as little energy as possible.
Yeah, that's an interesting juxtaposition. You actually had a chance to learn from Hickson, or I guess the Gracies, using their breathing methods, or again, if I'm misstating that, please correct me. But I remember you talking about experiencing them breathing, and at first you thought they were messing with you. They were, doing these funny breathing, what seemed like funny breathing patterns while they were rolling. And then eventually you started to realize, like, oh no, they're purposefully using breathing, to help them remain efficient and not gas out. And so, yeah, like, famously Rickson Gracie, who's like, the greatest jiu-jitsu fighter of all time, he used breathing and credits breathing with playing a big role in his success competitively and all of that. So I guess, can you kind of speak to that a little bit, like kind of your experience with the Gracies and their breathing stuff?
Well, it was mostly Hoist I used to roll with a lot back in the day.
Okay.
He used to roll with me for literally for hours. It was really wonderful. That's how I cut my teeth as a blue belt, purple belt. And Hoist always had a very peculiar breathing pattern. And I learned later he got it from his brother Hickson. And I did observe Hickson at the Gracie Academy when he was still there before he left, when it was like all the brothers were together. I observed his private workouts and his breathing, and he did a lot of pranayama yogic breathing, breath of fire. He liked doing the stomach churning, a lot of breath technique from the yoga disciplines. And he learned a lot of his yoga from the guy that created, well, they call it gymnastic natural, but that's been taken by somebody else. The original one was not called gymnastic natural; it was called something else. I forget, but that was Hickson's mentor. And then nice. A student of the same guy took and called it and rebranded it and called it gymnastic natural. And that's where Hickson got his breathing. But he also, being the innovator and amazing, they always would be softly exhaling throughout the whole roll, and you could hear it, and you would realize that they were doing something very special. And the main thing is not to hold the breath and to keep calm, inhaling through the nose as much as you can and letting the breath out. And sometimes you have to breathe very quickly if someone's compressing your torso, or knee in the belly, or has you in a bad situation where it's kind of hard to breathe. You learn to take little breaths as opposed to panicking and holding the breath, because you'll hear a lot of white belt, blue belt, even purple belts like grunting, and that's all the soft ascent, which is very, very bad. Spikes your blood pressure, makes you exhausted. You don't get oxygen to the tissues. You got to breathe freely the whole time, and it takes practice. It takes a lot of practice, but you have to bring awareness to the breath in the first place. So a lot of people have no awareness at all. They have no clue what they're doing when it comes to breathing.
Yeah.
So, I still do breath work outside every day. I'll go out and I'll walk, and one of the real nice ones to start with, just to bring awareness, is inhale through the nose in 4 steps, hold the breath for 4 steps, exhale for 4 steps, hold the breath for 4 steps. So out of every 16 steps, you're only inhaling for 4 of them. That's a very old, ancient exercise. It's called square breathing. It's a great way to get introduced to proper breathing. Now, I just got done saying holding your breath is not a good idea. Voluntarily holding your breath is fine. What that does is it creates like an oxygen hunger and gets you used to having CO2 build up in your blood, because most people overbreathe, breathe way too much too often. And it's because they're overly sensitive to CO2 buildup. When the oxygen goes into the cell, CO2 is released, you exhale the CO2 out. But if you exhale too much CO2 out, you can't uptake oxygen. It's a very complex biochemical thing that happens in each cell. You need CO2 in order to uptake oxygen, but you breathe in too much oxygen, you exhale out too much CO2. So you're over breathing and you're getting all this oxygen, but none of it's being taken into the cell.
Yeah, no, that's something that I've actually done the Oxygen Advantage certification.
Well, then you know
So
exactly what I'm talking about. And
yeah,
I'm explaining it in the most simplistic terms.
no. Yeah, no, it's great. And because I've talked about some of these things as well. And I think the CO2 tolerance, because this is awesome. I got all these lists of things that I wanted to make sure I talked to you about. And you're just like, it's like I sent you the list ahead of time. You're just like segueing into all the things because, with the breathing, definitely wanted to touch on the CO2 because that's something that a lot of people I don't think realize, that CO2 tolerance is important because that's what causes that breathless feeling, kind of that panicky, like I can't catch my breath. But like you said, that if you have your CO2 levels are too low because your body relies on CO2 to unlock oxygen from the red blood cells, you're not able to oxygenate your working muscles as effectively. And so that using the breathing to, one, just learn how to breathe better, like you're talking about, like breathing into the lower lungs and using your nose, but then also using drills like the square breathing to help increase your CO2 tolerance so that you're able to, be able to take advantage of the higher CO2 levels without it triggering the panicky breathing. So that's I'm glad you touched on that.
And there's many other drills too. I mean, oh my God, there's so many different drills, the high altitude simulation breathing, I worked a lot with Russian martial arts. I got very fascinated with Systema, and a lot of people don't understand Systema. They think it's just the big fat guy on YouTube making people fall down. No. That's just one little group of guys. His student, actually, Vladimir Vasiliev, is actually the real deal. That guy's, I've trained with him. But no, I went to Russia 8 times and trained with real Russian martial artists. It's a military martial art. It's a military combat system, hand-to-hand combat. And it's very effective. And, I'm a master Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu guy. And believe me, those guys were very formidable. And many of them have also combat sambo as well as Systema. They know fight, they do. And real fight, like as in killing people in the battlefield type fight.
Right.
Not, bump fist and start on your knees and, sit in your butt and pull a gun in your guard. No. Yeah. These guys, weapons, everything. So anyway, they do a lot of breath work. And I learned a lot of really cool breathing exercises from these guys. Really nice stuff, like breath ladders, taking one step in or, like 2 steps in, 2 steps out, 3, then 4, then 5, going the whole way up to 20 sometimes, Maybe you heard this endogenous breathing where you just take like a little sniff of air, and then you just stretch the exhale over a really long period of time. Sometimes like on a good day, I can take a sniff of air. It kind of reminds me of drown proofing that we learned my lifeguard training back when I was a PE major, where they tie your hands behind your back and you had a survival swim in the deep end of the pool, and you weren't allowed to bob up and down off the bottom. And you would just lie in the water, exhale, take a little sniff, and then lie in the water. and then blow all the air, take a sniff, and you can survive a long time just laying in the water, even without your hands, just by relaxing and breathing. Well, that endogenous breathing, a perpetual exhale with little snips, that's a great way to build up your CO2 tolerance, man. That's one of my favorite ways to do it. And I learned that from the Russian systemic guys.
Nice. Yeah. So, awesome, man. Well, I see we've been on for about an hour. I don't want to take up too much of your time, but I did want to, before we go, touch on your website, maxwellsc.com. I'll make sure I include the link in the show notes, but you've got a lot of great resources there. You've got stuff on breathing, isometrics, just all the things that we talked about here today. You have both free resources and programs and stuff that people can buy to get more into that. So I just want to make sure that people check that out. Do you have anything in particular you'd say, hey, check this out if you go to my website?
The Isometrics 3 ways is actually a really good video to start out with. Really good. I mean, I cover all the basics of time static contraction. And the universal mobility is really, really good for grapplers. Give me 15 minutes. I'll add 15 years. That's it's very simple stuff. I mean, it was basically geared towards the senior jiu-jitsu guy, or older guys that are just getting started out. But I mean, I do that stuff every time I train. I'll do those mobility drills. I do other stuff too, but I wanted something very easy and simple to understand to at least get people started, and then they can break it out from there. But those would be good. They give me 15 minutes. They give me 5 video series too. It's really, really good. I talk a little bit about breathing, a little systemic jogging. I have like a simple shoulder mobility, hip mobility. So that'd be a good start for anyone wanting to, check this stuff out.
Excellent. Cool. Like I said, I'll include the link, and encourage everybody to go over to Steve's website. You can sign up for his newsletter to stay up to date with any projects he's got going, or seminars or workshops he might be putting on in the future. If you get a chance to learn from Steve in person, I highly recommend it. He's a great inspired teacher who's got a really effective way of communicating complex ideas in a way that makes sense and makes it easy for you to implement. So like I said, man, he took something like isometrics and in one afternoon turned it from something that I was like, well, I kind of understand it, but it's too complex for me to really make use of, to like, oh, well, this is like a core part of training from this point forward. So I encourage people to check that out. So, well, yeah, any words before we close this down?
One last thing too, I'd like to make a little announcement. Perhaps you heard of Richard Bressler,
Yes.
He's a very good friend of mine. As a matter of fact, he was instrumental in helping me pass my teacher training certification under Jorge and Gracie. The Gracie family had a teacher training program, basically how to teach jiu-jitsu. And Richard, it was a very difficult program. I mean, it wasn't like, they were very exacting and demanding about the way you teach. And Richard wrote this awesome book called Worth Defending. He's basically like student zero in the US. He was like the first student. And I mean, here was a really little guy with no athleticism at all, and became a black belt in jiu-jitsu. And it's very encouraging to anyone starting out there that if Richard can do it, anyone do it. And he worked long and hard to get where he's at. And he's very good. Well, we're doing joint seminar anywhere in the Seattle area. Richard is not a traveler, but he comes up to see his mother here on the Olympic Peninsula. I live in Washington State. So we're looking for any schools in this whole Washington State area around, the Seattle area, Port Townsend, Port Angeles, any of these areas on the peninsula that would like to host us. And we'll give you guys a really good seminar.
Awesome. Yeah, no, that's good. Hopefully this gets out some people that can help with that. I've actually read that book. It's
Great little book.
excellent. Yes. Yeah. No, I love that. The quote at the beginning. In fact, I apologize for not remembering which one of the Gracie brothers it was attributed to, but it's there was that self-defense is a mindset, and it starts with answering the question, are you worth defending?
Are you
And
defending?
yeah,
By the way,
that,
the book was written by my first black belt, Scott Burr. My first made BJJ black belt was a fellow by the name of Scott Burr, who happens to be a really good writer.
uh-huh.
He was the writer that wrote that book.
Oh, okay. Oh, wow. All right. Well, brings it all.
He's actually writing a book now with Chris Howder.
Oh, okay. I know of Chris as well. Another super old
Chris
school
was
jiu-jitsu guy.
Old G guys. One of the
Yeah.
original Dirty Dozen guys. So he goes way back.
Yep.
And he's writing his memoirs. So I'm thinking about getting with Scott and writing my memoirs about how I spread jiu-jitsu on the East Coast of the United States.
Yeah, because you were the first East Coast black belt, right?
First House and Gracie black belt, and definitely the first one to be running a school in the Eastern Seaboard of the U.S. Gracie Jiu-Jitsu.
Yeah, no. I'm
I even had of Hoyce, and he thanked me and my ex-wife. Thank you for bringing Gracie Jiu-Jitsu to the East Coast. That was actually in my show for years. I hope someone still has that. Yeah, that'd be a real collector then.
That would be for sure. Well, excellent, Steve. Well, hey, man, I really appreciate your time and all of your insights into all of this. And like I said, I encourage people to go check you out at maxwellsc.com. And yeah, man, I've enjoyed the conversation. So we'll wrap it up. And
yeah,
excellent, man. Well, cool. Well, everybody, go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, enjoy your weekend. I'm always excited about the NFL playoffs. So
yes, yeah. Well, we got Dallas and Tampa Bay, and unfortunately, I was born near Dallas, so I've been cursed with that as my team. So when I was in high school, it was great when they were winning freaking 3 out of 4, and ever since then, it's just been freaking heartbreak after heartbreak. So I don't trust those bastards.
The man to get it, man.
Yep. Awesome. Cool. Well, I'm going to go ahead and sign off. So everybody, remember, you can check me out at bikejames.com, and I will talk to everybody next time.